How the Boeing 747 changed the world forever. The airplane that made the world smaller. Imagine standing inside a crowded airport in the late 1960s. Passengers are moving through terminals. Airlines are growing rapidly. The world is becoming more connected than ever before. Then suddenly, people stop walking. They stare out of the window. Something enormous is slowly moving across the runway. At first glance, it doesn't even look like an airplane. It looks like a building with wings. Its upper deck sits above the cockpit. Its massive body towers over every aircraft around it. Even experienced pilots cannot believe what they are seeing. Many experts think it is too large, too expensive, too ambitious. Some predict it will become one of the biggest failures in aviation history. Instead, it will revolutionize global travel, carry billions of passengers, connect continents, transform international business, and become one of the most recognizable machines ever built. This is the incredible story of the Boeing 747, the airplane that changed the world forever. The world before the 747 today, flying across oceans feels normal. Millions of people travel internationally every year, but before the Boeing 747, air travel was very different. Flying was expensive. Tickets were often beyond the reach of average families. International travel was considered a luxury. Business executives, celebrities, government officials, these were the people most commonly seen on long-distance flights. Most aircraft carried relatively small numbers of passengers. Airlines wanted to expand, but there was a problem. Demand for travel was growing much faster than aircraft capacity. Airports were becoming crowded. More people wanted to fly. The aviation industry needed something bigger, something more efficient, something revolutionary. And that challenge would eventually land on the desk of a man named Juan Trippe, the man with a crazy idea. Juan Trippe was the founder of Pan American World Airways, better known as Pan Am. At the time, Pan Am was one of the most famous airlines in the world. Trippe believed aviation had a bright future, but he also believed airlines needed a much larger aircraft, an airplane capable of carrying hundreds of passengers at once. Most people thought the idea was unrealistic. Airplanes were already becoming larger. Why risk building something gigantic? But Trippe had a vision. He believed that if airlines could carry more passengers on each flight, ticket prices would eventually become cheaper. And cheaper tickets would allow ordinary people to travel. His dream wasn't just building a bigger airplane. His dream was making global travel accessible to millions. The challenge was finding someone willing to build it. That someone would be Boeing. Boeing takes the risk. In the mid-1960s, Boeing received one of the most ambitious requests in aviation history: build the largest passenger airplane ever created. The project would be extremely expensive, extremely complex, and incredibly risky. At the time, many aviation experts believed supersonic aircraft would dominate the future. Some predicted traditional jumbo jets would eventually disappear. That meant Boeing could spend billions creating an aircraft that nobody wanted. The stakes were enormous. Yet Boeing accepted the challenge. Engineers immediately began working on designs unlike anything seen before. The goal was simple: build an aircraft so large that it would completely redefine commercial aviation. But achieving that goal would push engineering to its limits. Building a giant. As work began, Boeing faced a problem. The airplane was so large that existing manufacturing facilities couldn't accommodate it. The company needed a factory capable of building something the world had never seen before. So Boeing built one. In Everett, Washington, construction crews created what would become one of the largest buildings on Earth by volume. The factory itself became an engineering marvel. Inside, thousands of workers collaborated on a project unlike anything in aviation history. Every component had to be redesigned. Every system had to be scaled up. Everything needed to be stronger, larger, more efficient. The aircraft's wings were enormous. Its landing gear was massive. Its engines were among the most powerful ever built. And at the center of it all stood a dream that many still considered impossible. The hump that made history. One of the Boeing 747's most recognizable features almost never existed. The upper deck, often called the hump. At first glance, it looks unusual, almost strange, but there was a reason for its design. When engineers began developing the aircraft, many believed cargo transportation would eventually become more important than passenger transportation. Boeing wanted the aircraft to remain useful even if passenger demand declined. To make cargo loading easier, designers placed the cockpit above the main deck. This allowed the front section of the aircraft to open for freight operations. The result created the iconic shape that would become famous around the world. Ironically, the feature designed for practicality became one of aviation's most recognizable symbols. Even today, people can identify a Boeing 747 from miles away. The pressure builds. As development continued, costs exploded. Deadlines approached. Investors became nervous. Executives worried. The project was consuming enormous resources. At one point, Boeing's future depended almost entirely on the success of the 747. Failure could have devastated the company. Workers pushed themselves to the limit. Engineers worked around the clock. Teams solved problem after problem. Yet despite their efforts, uncertainty remained. Nobody knew whether airlines would embrace the giant aircraft. Nobody knew whether passengers would trust it. And nobody knew whether the gamble would pay off. The entire aviation industry watched closely, waiting, wondering, and hoping. The first flight. Finally, after years of work, the moment arrived. Thousands gathered to witness history. Engineers, executives, journalists, aviation enthusiasts. Everyone wanted to see whether the world's largest passenger aircraft could actually fly. As the engines roared to life, the enormous machine began moving down the runway. Its weight was staggering. Its size was unbelievable. Yet slowly, the giant accelerated. Faster, faster, and then it lifted off the ground. The impossible had become reality. Cheers erupted. The Boeing 747 was flying, and at that moment, aviation history changed forever. The aircraft performed beautifully. The design worked. The engineering succeeded. Years of effort had paid off. But the real challenge was only beginning, because now Boeing had to prove that the aircraft could transform commercial travel, and that would require convincing the airplane that made the world smaller. The day the world changed, January 22, 1970, thousands of passengers gathered at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport. Television cameras pointed toward the runway. Reporters waited with notebooks in hand. Pilots watched from terminal windows. Everyone wanted to witness history. Pan American Flight 2 was preparing for takeoff. It wasn't just another flight. It was the first commercial Boeing 747 service. As the giant aircraft slowly rolled toward the runway, people realized aviation had entered a new era. Passengers walked through an enormous cabin unlike anything they had seen before. Wide aisles, hundreds of seats, a spiral staircase leading to the upper deck, large windows, more luggage space. The experience felt less like boarding an airplane and more like entering a luxury hotel. When the engines reached full power, the aircraft accelerated. Seconds later, the Queen of the Skies lifted into the air. Commercial aviation would never be the same again. Making the world smaller. Before the Boeing 747, international travel was expensive and limited. For many families, flying overseas remained only a dream. But the jumbo jet changed everything. Because it could carry far more passengers than previous aircraft, airlines reduced the cost per seat. Slowly, ticket prices became more affordable. Millions of ordinary people suddenly had access to international travel. Families visited countries they had only seen in magazines. Students studied abroad. Businesses expanded across continents. Tourism exploded. Cities that once welcomed thousands of visitors now welcome millions. Hotels were built. Airports expanded. Entire economies benefited. The Boeing 747 didn't simply transport passengers. It connected cultures, ideas, businesses, and people. For the first time in history, the world truly began feeling smaller. The Queen of the Skies. As years passed, the Boeing 747 earned a nickname that perfectly matched its reputation. The Queen of the Skies. Pilots admired its stability. Passengers loved its comfort. Airlines appreciated its capacity. Its distinctive upper deck became one of the most recognizable shapes in aviation. Even people who knew nothing about airplanes could identify a Boeing 747 instantly. Hollywood featured it in blockbuster movies. Television shows used it as a symbol of international travel. Presidents flew modified versions. World leaders trusted it. Cargo companies relied on it. For decades, the Boeing 747 became more than an airplane. It became an icon, a symbol of engineering excellence and global connection. More than a passenger plane, the 747 wasn't limited to commercial airlines. Its enormous size made it useful for extraordinary missions. Cargo versions transported massive equipment across continents. Special aircraft carried spacecraft components. Modified 747s launched satellites and research vehicles into the atmosphere. One version even transported NASA's space shuttle across the United States. The sight amazed millions. A spacecraft riding on top of an airplane.